So I've done my best to cover it all in this video, so whether you're brand new to rocket racing or you've been playing for a little while, I'm sure you'll find something useful in here. We're going to go from the very basics of this game into some more advanced things you might not know about. Now if you're watching this in the future, let's say season 1, 2, 3, whatever, you should still learn something from this video, because the things I cover I don't think are going to change anytime soon. So let's help you win more games, let's get right into it, and don't forget to subscribe. First up is the controls. Now there's a tutorial in the game, so we're going to move through this really quickly. Basically, it's a racing game. You can drive forward, you could reverse, you could hit the brakes, you can drift. The difference with rocket racing though is you can also jump and fly, and you have turbo boost, and you can drive on the walls. So let's talk about flying and air dodging. So after your initial jump, you can press the jump button again to stay in the air and start flying. Also, how you pitch your car affects how the car flies. So you can press forward to point your nose down and fall towards the ground quicker, or you can pull back to stay in the air longer. You can also air dodge or flip while you're in the air, and by default it should be bound to the same button as your drift. So while you're in the air, you hold the analog stick in the direction you want to flip, left, right, up, or down, and you press the button. If there's a surface nearby, your car will try to line itself up and attach to that surface, whether that's a wall, a ceiling, or even the ground, to land faster. Next up is drifting, which is very important in rocket racing. I'll go more into detail later on some more advanced stuff, but for now let's start with the basics. So while you're turning, your drift will start automatically, which can be annoying, but it's something to get used to. But you can also press the rocket drift button to initiate a drift. Again, there's more to it than that as we get into the advanced section, but for now that's basically all you need to know. So the next thing to mention in this section of the video is turbo. Turbo is built up passively over time during the race, but it's also built up even faster while you're drifting. Your current amount of turbo is shown by this meter here, and each chunk is one full charge. When you build up a charge of turbo, press the turbo button to use it, and you gain a quick increase in speed. After a little bit, you'll see the button blinking near the turbo meter, which is your cue to press the button again to get full use of your turbo. Pressing it too soon causes a miss in that second part of the turbo use, and waiting too long can also cause a miss. You could hold a maximum of 3 turbocharges at once. Now on to the mechanics section. At the start of every race, there's a chance to gain an advantage right away with an early speed boost, which shows up as a percentage at the start of the race. Getting 100% is all about the timing of when you press accelerate. At the start of the countdown, when these lights first pop up, don't press anything at all. As the red lights appear, you'll want to get a sense of the timing, which is like a metronome. Getting 100% boost in the beginning is all about pressing down the accelerate button right as the green light shows up, or maybe a little bit before. It definitely takes some practice as the speed that the light shows up change every race, but once you get the hang of it, it's actually very easy. Now, we've talked about drifting a little bit, but here's how to actually drift properly and take full advantage of it. When you drift, you build up 2 things. First, you charge turbo, which is shown by this meter here. You also build up a speed boost indicated by this bar on the bottom. When you come out of a drift, the boost built up in this green bar gets used, causing you to gain speed for a short time. But you do keep the turbo that you've built up. The longer you hold the drift, the more turbo you charge, and the bigger your speed boost at the bottom will be. But past a certain point, it's not really worth it, since you also lose speed while drifting. To start a drift manually, you steer in the direction you want your car to turn and tap the rocket drift button. This will kick your car out into a tight angle and start the drift right away. Just tapping the button is fine, you don't need to hold it down, but in a minute I'm going to explain why it might actually be useful sometimes to hold it down. Anyway, after your first tap, you can tap it again for an even tighter drift. Now, a few of you guys have asked me how to do the chain drifting, which is when you have a series of tight turns and you continuously drift in opposite directions without using up that speed boost at the bottom. Basically what you want to do is get the first drift going, and then immediately when you're ready to change directions, flick the analog stick to the other side and press the rocket drift button again to kick your car back out to the other side. Now, sometimes during races, I'll find myself spamming the button when I'm trying to get a chain drift going, so it is another one of those things that you just need to practice. Now, this is a bit more advanced, but if you're holding the drift button down and you're in the middle of a drift without letting it go, you jump. Once you land on the ground, you'll keep that boost that you've built up at the bottom. So you can jump in the middle of a drift, land, keep your drift, and control it from there, or just do that so when you land, you have that speed boost that you've built up. Otherwise, if you jump in the middle of a drift without doing that, you lose that speed boost that you've built up. It's very situational, and I've only found a few spots on certain maps where I use it every time, so just experiment with it, and if you guys find a good spot for it, let me know. Next thing you need to know about is turbo. It's built up passively over time, as I mentioned before, and it also gets charged up while drifting, which is why you'll often see a lot of players drifting randomly on straightaways. They get that speed boost when they come out of the drift, and they build up the turbo, which is very important because on pretty much every track and every route, there's a very specific amount of boost you want to have. And learning how to build up a few extra turbos over the course of a race could help you win more games. So speaking of that, let's talk about turbo management. Now, it really does depend on the track and the route, so this is just general guidance, not really a rule to follow. These are rules to break. But the main times when you want to use turbo is if you need it for a shortcut. I sometimes like to use it early in a race if I want to break away from the pack, because we all know how it feels to get bumped in this game. I'll use it when I'm almost at 3 full charges, because if you're full, you can't build up more, and so it just goes to waste. And on the last lap, so I make sure it all gets full value. Now, it really does depend on the map itself, so I can't really teach all of it here, but I do recommend looking up speedrunners and the routes that they're taking. However, some speedrunning routes may need to be tweaked or adapted to make sense in races with other players. And one final thing for this section is air dodging or flipping. Like I mentioned earlier, you just hold the direction you want to flip and you press your rocket drift or your air dodge button if you have it rebound to something else. And how much your car flips depends on how far you are from the surface you're trying to flip into. So if you're at the wrong distance, you could scrape the top of your car, and as you'll see, the meter turns red and you lose some speed. This comes in handy a lot for me. I like to stay on the ground. So there's a lot of situations where you'll see me jump, wait a second until I'm close enough to the ground so that when I air dodge back down, my car doesn't flip and make me lose speed. Again, it's all about practice, practice, practice. So that's pretty much it for mechanics, and I kept mentioning practice because mechanics really do just come with time, and you'll have to experiment and try them yourself to get a good feel for it. Next up is map knowledge, which obviously in a racing game that has shortcuts is super, super important. But for a beginner's guide, what I will say is you should learn the basics of the tracks, like where the boosters are, get used to taking turns without running into hazards, and then you can start learning the shortcuts. And as you learn them, sometimes, especially in the lower ranks, it can work out fine in a lot of cases to just stick to the route you're comfortable with, which is something that I like to do. I come up with a route that I'm really comfortable with, and then I see what other players do, and then I adapt, evolve from there. I just find that more fun than just straight up looking up a route and copying it and practicing it, especially because depending on your rank, you may not need to hit the absolute perfect route. And I just have more fun that way. But when you do want to get really advanced, you can look up speedrun.com to find the absolute fastest, most optimized routes. But there's a difference between running a route by yourself and with other players, which, as I said, means you might need to tweak or adapt the route depending on the situation, depending on how many players are in your way, and how those routes actually play out when other people are bumping into you. But if you watch speedruns, it is still helpful just for picking up those things that you missed, seeing how they take turns, and understanding what is optimal. Don't forget to just experiment and have fun with it yourself. Those speedrun videos will always be there. Finally, we have other players. Dealing with other cars on the track will absolutely be make or break for winning races, unless you're playing the time trial mode when that comes out. So the first thing to mention is drafting. So if you're not familiar with other racing games, if you follow relatively close behind somebody, you'll see and hear a slipstream of wind around your car, telling you that you've started drafting off of the player in front of you, and it gives you an increase in speed, which can be helpful for passing and taking the lead. Next up is bumping. This might be fully fixed by the time you're watching this, I hope, but at the time of recording this, with the current desync issues in mind, the most important thing I could say about bumping is to do your best to avoid getting bumped. Something I've been doing a lot is taking less optimal routes or taking a wider turn just to avoid getting caught up in the pack and destroyed by other people. But even though that's not optimal, nothing penalizes you more than just getting deleted, waiting to respawn, and having to start back from 0 speed. And then the last note about other players is that sometimes they may turbo to get ahead of you. For example, if someone uses a turbo to get ahead of you and now you're in second, but you're saving 2 turbos for your route that you know is fast, don't panic and waste it to catch back up right away. It doesn't matter what place you're in until the very end of the race. And you never know, they might be sitting at 0 turbos, you can draft off of them and take advantage, now you're in first and you have turbo. Just as long as you take the lead by the end of the race. Alright, that should be everything to get you started. If you learned something in this video, let me know, and be sure to subscribe. We do a lot of cool videos on this channel, and if there's anything you want to add for a new player that I didn't mention in this video, be sure to leave that in the comments as well. Because who knows, maybe we'll do an updated version or a part 2 in the future. Either way, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next one.